this case is such a good backdrop for a book. And this is why I was so scared when I tried the case, because you can look at it from the other side and say, oh God, they have a good case. It's like a 50% case. It could go either way. And no matter how I had the jury come out, I feel like it was justified one way or the other. So obviously I picked the ending that I think is best for storytelling purposes.
Hello and welcome to the Thriller Pitch Podcast, the director's cut of the thriller book world. I'm your host, Mark Nadell, and joining me today is James Rosenberg, author of the legal thriller Unclean Hands. Jim, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you so much for having me.
I have your book with me, Unclean Hands. I'm showing it to the camera. Thank you for sending me an autographed copy. I loved it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for having me. It's always nice to find new readers.
And interesting fact, this is the first legal thriller. You're the first legal thriller guest I've had on the show. So I'm excited to talk legal thrillers because this is the first time I've had to ask about the specifics of legal thrillers and all that. So this is going to be fun.
I just want to say before we get started that whenever I give a talk, it's to convince people that legal thrillers are like the greatest genre and everybody loves them. So hopefully part of this pitch will be to get people to like legal thrillers more than they do already.
Okay, well, let's do it then. Pitch me Unclean Hands.
The short pitch for Unclean Hands is, should somebody die for shoplifting? The story involves a man who was killed while shoplifting, and then involves a trial that his wife brings on his behalf for dying improperly, for wrongful homicide. It is based on a trial that I handled 15 years ago. That was the scariest trial that I ever handled because I handled it on behalf of the people who killed the shoplifter. So it was very nerve-wracking, but it's a really interesting story, and there's lots of parallels between what happened in that trial and what's in the book, which is obviously fictionalized, but also there are some parallels to events that have occurred since then that make, whether or not it's okay to kill somebody in a parking lot even more relevant than it was.
Awesome. Well, normally my first question is, where'd the idea come from? And now you kind of explain that with the fact that 15 years ago, it was based on something that happened. That's awesome. I did not see that coming. Can you give me a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've written 5 books in the Verdicts and Vindication series, and 3 of which are based on trials that I have handled. And so they're the fictionalized version of the trials that I've handled. This case that's in Unclean Hands occurred in a grocery store in a small town in Ohio, and a sort of nice, sort of not so nice guy stole stuff from the store. The manager and another assistant chased him through the parking lot, tackled him, and then had 2 people help them out to detain them until the police came. And unfortunately, by the time the police came, they had smothered the guy to death. So it was a question it's a question of whether or not, how far you can go to detain somebody for shoplifting, or put the other way, should somebody die for stealing from a big company?
Yeah. So you were defense. You meant you were the defense of this case. So
yes.
You were on the opposite side of our hero
in
of
real
this
life.
book. What was that like?
That was the scariest trial I've had in my life. We won that case, but I'm reasonably confident that if the case came up now, given the change in way things have happened in our country, that we'd stand a much greater chance of losing that case. But in real life during that trial, there were some really fascinating people who testified and who show up in the book as a fictionalized form of themselves, one of which was Cyril Wecht, who testified on behalf of the plaintiff, the guy who died. And Cyril Wecht, for those who don't know, was a famous coroner who is from my town of Pittsburgh, but had a national reputation that he originally got getting involved in the Kennedy murders. But he was a big name. He had a huge ego. He testified on behalf of the plaintiffs in that case, and he was an okay witness. But he wasn't as great as he thought he was. But I mean, the whole trial, and in that trial, after the trial was over, after we're waiting for the jury, it took the jury 2 weeks to come to a verdict, which I've never experienced, and that was gut wrenching. We would drive up to the court every day and wait for the verdict to come, and we knew that if we lost the case, it was going to be a significant verdict, millions of dollars. Luckily, in that case, it wasn't. I won't say what happens in the book, but there's a different ending than what happened in real life.
Wow. So if we take a small step back when we're talking about legal thrillers, and this was a court case that I assume, given that it was drawn out over, I don't know the length of time, but let's say weeks or months or however long this case went on. How do you go about crafting this real world situation that happened to you while trying to maintain what is a thriller pace for legal thrillers?
I started writing, and I operated under the assumption that people were interested in seeing exactly what happened in the courtroom. And so my books all include pretty much a full-blown trial from start to finish, from picking the jury to opening statements to pretty much all the witnesses, direct examination and cross-examination. And the people who read these books are really interested in the dynamics of the courtroom. This book, interesting story, when I finished writing it, I found an editor to review the book who turned out to be a relatively young woman who wrote me back as part of her critique that she didn't believe that anything in the book was real and that nobody would ever believe it, and that this is not how judges would act and this isn't how lawyers would act in the courtroom. And I wrote her back and I said, this is taken like word for word from what happened in this trial. I'm pretty confident it's a good reflection of reality. But the point being that people who read in this genre, and I think I do this more than most people. I mean, Grisham, when he writes his books, he has courtroom scenes, but generally speaking, he summarizes them more than gives specific testimony. I give much more specific testimony than summarize, because I think people enjoy getting in the head of a lawyer and thinking, why is he asking this question? Why is he thinking this way? And yeah, it's not for everybody, but it's for a lot of people.
Yeah. I actually moved from being a fan of fantasy, is kind of how I started with my so-called reading journey. And then I got into Grisham. Funny that you mentioned that. And the Lincoln Lawyer, Michael Connelly's The Lincoln Lawyer. So I absolutely love legal thrillers. And I love how this book actually did play out that whole scene and as we were unfolding it. So it was really enjoyable. What kind of challenge did this book present to you as an author and a lawyer?
Well, every book presents a challenge in terms of getting it written. I still work full-time as a lawyer, so I try and sneak in writing as much as I can because I really, really, really enjoy it. In this book, the challenge for me was trying to write characters who were interesting and real and give an accurate reflection of what it's like to be a lawyer, and try and get a sense of the pressure that lawyers feel when they're trying cases, which is, I talked when I'm trying a case, from the smallest case to the biggest case, I get really anxious. And I think it's pretty typical for most trial lawyers. You don't sleep at night, you worry about it, you think about all the worst things that could happen. And that kind of eats at you. So when you're in trial, the week or 2 weeks that it is that are in trial are difficult. They're horrible. I mean, you don't sleep. You're nasty to your wife. I didn't say that, but you're not a pleasant person to be around, and all you do is worry. So my goal was to convey the pressure that a lawyer is under while trying a case. trying to corral your witnesses, trying to make sure that you have all your exhibits ready, trying to make sure that you make a good presentation to the jury. And a good lawyer is able to make a good presentation to the jury where they don't even realize like how much work went into it, and it just looks easy and natural. So I try and present that in a court case the same way. Like, oh yeah, that sounds good, that looks good, but give the reader an understanding of how much work went into the lawyer actually making that presentation that looked pretty easy.
Yeah. Do you find, like, when you crafted the first draft of this book, do you find that you almost overwrite it and then come back to cut for pacing or to try and move the story faster?
I would say no. There's the old, pantser versus plotter discussion.
Yeah.
And I am 100% a pantser. And so I know where a book's starting and I pretty much know where a book's ending. And the fun is getting it there, filling in all the blanks in between. I am pretty good about plotting as I go along. And I definitely edit a lot after I finish the first draft. It goes through 3, 4, 5 drafts before you even send it to an editor. But it's not a huge amount of plot changing or cutting. It's more crafting and making it sound better and making sure that it's clear to the reader. So mainly I'm pretty good about getting the plot, but and trust me, there's always holes and you always got to add stuff. And this book in particular, there were a couple of times when I felt like I wrote myself into a corner, and you kind of got to back it off and try and get around that corner in a different way. But usually I get that done by the end of the first draft. And so the whole process is, my favorite time in writing a book is at the end of the first draft, because then for the second draft, you get to read the book and you actually that's when I learn what the story actually is. Like, does it connect together well? Do characters have a good arc? That sort of thing. And so the whole, finding out what the actual story is to me is fun, and reading it as a reader so that I can get a sense that a reader would like this or enjoy this or what they wouldn't like is a lot of the fun for me.
Who's your first reader and how early do they read your book?
Generally speaking, my first reader is my wife, and she gets first crack at it, but she's usually pretty slow. And the second reader is my old secretary, who reads a ton and gives incredibly good feedback. So those two are kind of 1A and 1B, and I rely, and then I have a group of other people who I usually send it to get feedback. And then you have 8 different people reading it and giving you feedback. And then it's trying and control the feedback so that you're, and that's hard. I have great trouble with that, but my wife gives really good feedback, and I listen to about 86% of what she has to say. And then she gets mad at me for not listening to the other 14, and always tells me that she was right in the choices that she was suggesting.
Yeah. What kind of suggestions happen in your books when you're essentially the expert? What kind of suggestions sometimes pop up in Unclean Hands that may have impacted the story?
There was the editor who said that the story wasn't real, which that wasn't a good suggestion. My wife always comes up with good character suggestions. Like, this is not how a person who you are describing them to be would act in this particular situation. So she's really good at making sure that characters stay true to form and that their story arc is real by the time you get to the end of the book. And there was a twist at the end of the book that my wife pretty much came up with. So she kind of suggested it based on a character arc. And so I think the twist is actually really good. I like it. So I give her all the credit in the world for that.
Nice. So when someone does finish the book and put the book down, what are you hoping they're going to feel or what they've experienced after reading this book?
Okay. So when I write, my plotting is very important, but ultimately my goal is for them to connect with the characters and I want them to feel something good. Well, I want them to feel something by the time they're done with the book. And so, I mean, most of these books, most legal thrillers stay with you for about 2 hours after you're done with them. My goal is that it stays with them a little bit longer. And the primary goal is to say, hey, I've read this book. I like this author. I want to go through and read his other books and connect with them. So there is always in the book, and this is where I'd say I distinguish myself from somebody like Grisham in that I think my books are more character driven, his books are more plot driven. And so the connection with the character and rooting for the character and wanting them to win or wanting, if they're an ass, wanting them to lose, that sort of thing is very important. So I want them to feel connected in some way to the characters in the book.
Do you ever write to have people think about the theme, and especially in this book, because I've been thinking about this book since I finished it, and I finished it like 5-6 days ago or something like that. And I'm still thinking about what happened and what side of the case I might be on, because it was such a difficult case, tried well by both sides, which were, nicely to portray both sides. But there's that question of I guess it did happen. I didn't follow the actual case. I didn't know it was a real case. But there's that question of wow, that's messed up. What happened and who's right and who's wrong?
Well, and this case, I mean, this is why I think this case is such a good backdrop for a book and this is why I was so scared when I tried the case, because you can look at it from the other side and say, oh God, they have a good case. And this one, this is one thing I say as an author is I really like being an author because I get to control the outcome of my cases. In real life, I don't. I'm relying upon real people who are jurors to say you're right or wrong. This case was really good because it's kind of like a 50% case. It could go either way. And no matter how I had the jury come out in this case, I feel like it was justified one way or the other. So obviously I picked the ending that I think is best for storytelling purposes, not necessarily for reality purposes. But I think of all the cases portrayed in all my books, this is the most evenly divided one. And you can read it any way you want and come out to any conclusion you want, which, it's interesting because in this book, there's video. It portrays video in the case. And video, I have found, video is much more prevalent than it used to be in trials because, there's 8 billion cameras out there now. And it is amazing when 2 people or 12 people on a jury watch a video. And I think the video obviously shows this to have happened. And jurors or other people look at the video and they see the exact opposite of what I see. So evidence is kind of a Rorschach test for people. They can see it however they want. And that's kind of why you do voir dire, to get to people's biases, to see how are they going to see the evidence? Are they going to see it the way you think you want them to, or are they going to see it the way the other side wants them to? And like I said, in this case, I think they could see it any way they want and they would be right.
Yeah. That sounds very intense to be involved in a case. And you said the toughest case of your life. I can see it because, man, even the way you're explaining it, that sounds insane to be on the other side of that, trying to justify and or defend in this case.
Well, all I can say is I tried this with another lawyer from our firm, And every morning I would find him in the parking lot of the hotel we were staying at, chain smoking cigarettes. He was a basket case. I was just incredibly nervous.
A couple of the characters, the defense in this case, and I'll try not to give spoilers. There might be light spoilers in a way, but did you write those characters in the conflict between the two sets of lawyers in order to almost sway the reader to want to come to the conclusion in the end that was hit?
I think the answer to that is no. I think it's more interesting if there's conflict among the attorneys. And,
okay,
so to give a little history that they had where they didn't like each other, yes, you're going to be rooting in this case for the protagonist against the nastier other side of lawyers, most likely. So yeah, I could see how that would sway you to want to see the evidence come out the way that it did. But it's one of my themes when I talk about legal thrillers is one of the reasons they're so interesting is that there's so many different potential forms of conflict. Meaning you got a witness on the stand who's being cross-examined by a lawyer. That's conflict. You got a judge who's bringing whatever stuff he or she is bringing. That can create conflict. The two lawyers can have conflict. And then you got to convince these 12 people who are sitting on the jury to see it your way. And that obviously creates conflict. So, like, you think about some of the greatest movie scenes in the history of movies, and immediately you can think of 3 or 4 or 5 really good courtroom scenes. And primarily it's because there's conflict and the stakes are generally really high because you're involving somebody's life in some material way. So the courtroom is a great little crucible for bringing together a whole bunch of conflict and a whole bunch of stress. And if you're only watching it rather than living it, that's much more fun and entertaining. So that's my short version on why people should read and go to the movies that involve legal thrillers.
Yeah, I agree. They're a lot of fun. In this book, at the beginning, you chose to introduce a number of characters quickly. How do you decide, or is there a trick that you have to try to keep the reader from getting confused or keeping track of who is who as each chapter we're kind of introduced to somebody new? And of course, it all comes together and it plays out well. But in the beginning, as a reader, sometimes we're caught thinking, okay, who's this character now? Who's this person?
And you're suggesting that you were a little bit confused there, which is fine. I mean, I don't believe my books are terribly complicated. And this book probably had more characters than most of mine do, but I trust the reader. I think generally speaking, the readers of my book are reasonably intelligent and they know that even if there's a little bit of difficulty of telling person A from person B at the beginning, by the time you get to chapter 12, you're going to have a pretty good idea of who's who and where they stand in the pecking order of importance as witnesses. So, I mean, yeah, this book, especially when you start including all the people who testified at trial, brings in a lot of characters. And I think that's partly where you rely upon beta readers to tell you if they're having difficulty keeping track of readers, which I don't believe in this book that was ever an issue for a beta reader. Not that I'm suggesting it's never an issue for anybody, but I think readers trust that you as an author will get them to where they need to get to not only understand the story, but to appreciate the story. So hopefully it wasn't terribly confusing.
No. I'm always curious when, at the very beginning, when I get different viewpoint characters, more so than the confusion of the characters themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal is you got to make them interesting in one form or another. And I mean, what I've liked, or what some people pointed out that they liked and they don't even realize, is one of the initial chapters introduces the husband and wife, the husband who ultimately dies, and sees them in their real light. But then I think the reader forgets what their real light is and sees the wife as a different person than she actually is, based upon the image that she's trying to project.
Yeah.
So I always struggle with trying to give readers enough information that they know what's going on and without spoon feeding them too much, so that they want to figure stuff out for themselves also.
Yeah. How do you keep track of everybody? Well, I guess a better question would be, how long does it take you to write a book? And then, assuming it's if you're just kind of putting pieces together when you're not working, how do you keep track of all those things yourselves, the characters and the personalities?
I mean, that's a great question. So my goal is to write a little bit more than one book a year, which it hasn't quite been that, but so to go start to finish on a book in a year means you got to write the first draft in 5 months, give or take, and then you got to go through all the revisions, and then you got to do everything else to get it ready to publish. I told you already, I'm a pantser, so I just kind of write. But the last chapter of the book, I don't know if too much detail, but I write on Atticus, which I really like as a writing tool. And the last chapter, even though it's not really a chapter, is all my notes on characters, where they stand in the book, perhaps motivations. I mean, my biggest trouble with characters is remembering their names. So I often have to go back there and go like, what's that friend's name again? What's the doctor's name again? Because I can't remember. And so I try and keep notes in the back to keep things consistent, and then rely upon beta readers when they tell you that you told me he had a green shirt on this page, now he's wearing a blue shirt, or he went to Johns Hopkins and now you're saying he went to the University of Dayton, whatever. It's like readers are really good at finding when you forget a detail and then put something conflicting into it.
Okay. I have a question from Susan Walters, who's the last guest on my show. She asks, do you have any unsold novels sitting in your desk, and is there a plan?
That's like, it feels like that's the perfect question. The answer is yes. And I started a book 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm probably halfway done with it, and I absolutely love it. And it's a political thriller / legal thriller where somebody's son, the main character's son, kills the president of the United States. And it gets into the political environment of today. It gets into whether or not it's ever justified to kill somebody. That seems to be a common theme. And I've written half of it. I think it's really good. And I want to finish it, but I'm so scared to finish it because it's going to piss off a lot of people. Presently, I'm like just about done with my next book, which is the start of a series. And I'm trying to decide if I should write the next 2 books in that series or go back to the book that I started 3 years ago and finish that one. And I don't know the answer yet. So again, it's like more time, I'd be able to get all these things done.
Yeah. So the concern is the political side of what's happening right now, without getting into political talk.
Yeah,
what's happening right now and what happens in your book, I would imagine.
Yes. And I don't want to draw us into a political discussion, okay. But yes, it would. Yeah, it raises things that would make a lot of people unhappy.
Okay. Most of your books currently are standalones, right? Even though, so in your series that you have planned coming up, I'm just curious because you mentioned a series. is it going to be the same lawyer taking on new cases? Is that how a series plays out to you?
No. This is so the first books I wrote were in the Verdicts and Vindication series, which you've already said and are right that they are 5 standalone books, which thematically there's definitely they're related and it's good to write in a series. So the next book I wrote, I kind of wanted to break away a little bit from the lawyer taking on a case and then going through the whole case, and I'm I'm trying to emulate Grisham a little more in this next book, and it's about a newly married couple who find out that her father, who's very successful, has received all of his backing from a Mexican drug cartel. So, what do you do when you find out that your father and father-in-law is in deep with the Mexican drug lords, and how that plays out? So so I've written the first book in that one, which is pretty much done, and then I realized like there's a lot of backstory that's pretty interesting, and then it doesn't resolve itself in the first book, so there's clearly a book or two after that to see what happens. So that is more typical of a series where you follow the same characters over time.
So are you going in the Grisham direction because it's just the idea, where the idea took you and it seems fun? And is it concerning for you to leave what people now know of your brand, so to speak, as these courtroom dramas?
No, it doesn't scare me that much because it's still a legal thriller. So it's still within the same genre, but I mean, I love Grisham. I think for what he does, he's awesome, and he sells an awful lot of books. So I'd like to emulate that. That'd be great.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, I think you got to branch out and move away a little bit over time.
Yeah, that's fair for sure. What advice would you give someone who just published their first or second book?
My advice to anybody who comes to me about writing is, and I'm presuming that they enjoy the whole process of writing, is to just keep writing. It's like, it's the best way to learn. It's the best way to feel good. It's obviously the best way to be productive. So, some people say like, oh, I'm having troubles getting out of this, so I just can't write. And I'm like, you're right. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it sucks, but just keep writing. And, then if you've just written your first book, then you get into the whole marketing thing. And I'm not sure other than you have to market, I don't really have great advice on that because that is my weak link, and I'm getting better at it and I'm learning how to do it. But it's like, what I like a lot about this whole writing stuff is the business aspect to it. So they do say, and I totally agree, you got to treat it as a business. So you got to learn not only how to write, but how to publish it, and then how to market it, and then how to write your next book so that you get boosted. Your first book gets boosted by writing your second book.
Mm-hmm. Do you find, given that you're still working full time, is writing right now, does it ever become almost overwhelming or difficult on top of your job? Like you have a second job that you're trying to get this next book out? Or do you still see it as like a hobby and it's just a pure joy to get to the page at the end of the day? Because you probably have some very long days, I would imagine. And to just get to that keyboard and to write, that's one of the things that new writers especially have a really hard time doing.
The answer is kind of no to both parts of that, because I don't treat writing as a hobby, but I also don't put pressure on myself to meet goals. I mean, my goal is to write a book a year, and if it takes 13 months, I don't care. But I mean, the process is I really love it. So coming home after work and writing, I love it. I mean, so some people ask me, like, how do you have time to write? And I say, because I have no social life, which is, my wife takes care of that. But the point being alone and writing is in the top three things I love to do. And also, I mean, what I used to be better, but I used to I would block out 20 minutes a day for writing. And that was enough to get pushing 1,000 words on the page to move you forward for that day. And then I remember being at a talk and being asked, like, when do you find time to write? And my boss was in the crowd that night. So I lied and I said, oh yeah, I write at 1:00 in the morning when I have time. When the truth was, I take 20 minutes a day at work or half an hour and write there. So usually I don't come home and write, but oftentimes I spend 20 minutes or half an hour at work clanking away on the keyboard and getting words down on the paper. And so far I haven't gotten in trouble for that.
Yeah, good strategy. I like that. What do you think, if you could pick one thing, what do you think has led to your success so far?
Writing about something I know and writing in a genre that people like. So I know about trials and I think people find them interesting to read about. And so that lets me write and sell books. It works.
That's great. Where can listeners find your books?
Amazon.
All right. That is the easiest place.
Yeah. I mean, you can go to my webpage, my author page, which is jamesrosenberglegalthrillers.com, and it'll direct you to Amazon, or you can go directly to Amazon and search either for my name or search for Verdicts and Vindication or search for Unclean Hands, and it will come up pretty quickly.
Awesome.
And
if people want to follow you, where could they do that?
I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook. I am on, oh God, what are all the social media sites? I can't even remember them. on most of them. I'm mediocre at it, but I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to connect with more and more people. I would love if people, went to my website and left their mailing address so that we can connect. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram are the two biggest at the moment. I just started doing Substack, which I have no idea how that's going.
Okay.
It's a whole new area.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Before, I just want to kind of pause to say thank you for those who are going to cut out before I go into the spoiler section, because I have a couple of questions I want to ask you that are spoiler full. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And for those who do not want to have the book spoiled, now's the time to pause, go read the book, and then come back and listen to the last few questions. So in the end, we discover that the twist is that Molly was having an affair, and she knew, presumably, well, she knew about the thefts that were going on. Do you think that changes what we perceive Rick's character arc to be?
I think that is a part of his character arc, is that he realized that he was totally duped by her and that he wanted to win so badly that he was willing to accept what she had to say, hook, line, and sinker. So yes, it alters his arc, but it's a big part of his arc also.
Yeah. Did you ever want to write a little bit more, like any more aftermath to that, or you were just happy to cut it there? I kind of want to know what happened to Rick after it.
Well, I think that's a good thing. And, hopefully with any book I write, people who read it say, yeah, I want to know more about these characters. I want to find out what they're doing later or how they got to the point that they got originally. So far, I haven't had that much of an urge to follow the characters in these books again, but who knows? So if they're interesting characters, then tomorrow should be an interesting day for them also, even though we don't know what tomorrow brings for them.
Do you ever think about the character when you're done writing it? Like when Rick went to work the next day, was he still elated that he solved all his problems with having solved something, having won the money that he did through the case, but knowing what he knows now?
Yeah, Rick clearly is going to be conflicted the next day. And I think that's pretty clear from his reaction at the end of the book. But I think that's up to the reader to decide. I mean, I think what Emily is going to do the next day is just as interesting. That she now has all this money. Does she have even a twinge of guilt over what she did? Or is she totally able to, I think she's totally able to justify it. But, and so, I mean, books, I guess in some way have to have resolution for the characters, but it can't resolve everything. Yeah. And so if a book stays with somebody after they're done reading, then yeah, they're going to think about the characters and where they're going next week, next year. Now I'm thinking about the first book I wrote, Legal Reserves, which had an epilogue at the end 5 years later. So I guess at that point I was more curious what the events of the trial would do to the characters, and I answered those in that book. But no, I did not do that here.
Okay. Do you yourself just move on to the next book? Do you find yourself like when you wrap one book up, or do you start writing your next book? Maybe a better question. Do you start writing your next book once one is like done, or are you waiting for it to be published?
I generally wait until it's published because there's so much work to be done on the book pretty much up until the date that it's published. And I find like I got to focus on that book. And it's really difficult to focus on the next book. And I always say with my trials, like once a trial's over, I'm done with it and I forget about it, which is for the most part true. Some stick with you longer because they hurt. But, for the most part, I can't remember the details of a trial 2 weeks after it happens. I think with books, I mean, I can tell you all about all my books. I don't forget them. But you kind of put them aside and move on to the next book because you want to make that one as good as possible.
Mm-hmm. When you wrote Rick's character, I guess, let's say the first draft of the book, or even any of the characters, do you write the legal thriller first and then add in almost the backstory or the side plot where we have Rick, who's, in the background is not just struggling with this court case and all those things going on in his brain, but he has his alimony payments and his child payments and his daughter's sick and all these other things that he has to battle right up until the end of the book?
I mean, I think for a main character, you got to have a concept of where they're coming from and what, first page, why they're standing in this position that they're standing. So I feel like my books are, again, character driven. So I need to know what drives that character in order to move the character, which then moves the plot. So Rick facing his demons, Rick dealing with his problems is all part of the plot that I got a pretty good sense of. Now, that's not to say that when you're done with the first draft or the second draft that you don't add details to make the character more interesting or make his arc more believable. But I think for the most part, especially with the main characters, you got a pretty good sense of their motivating factors from the beginning.
Okay. So as a pantser, you almost have like a vague outline of character already in your mind versus writing down like an outline.
Yes. And that said, like I said, you have a general concept of who the character is or why they are, but when you write it, I always feel like I learn who my characters are when you write it. You learn the details about them, and it's like, you write a page or whatever about that character, and you're like, oh, that's pretty interesting. That's good. That's I like that detail kind of thing. It's like, Rick can be interesting.
Sure. Yeah, it's really fun to discover characters as you go, and any plan doesn't survive plans most of the time, unless you're a heavy outliner. I'm a bit more of an outliner, but my plans never, even as my outline, my characters always throw things into the story where I'm like, they're not.
Well, I was just going to ask you, are you a planner or a pantser? But I'm guessing you're the combination of both.
Yeah.
Which I think
I have a general idea of what's going to happen. I don't do chapter by chapter, but I have a synopsis. I have my book cover. I get my book cover kind of like done up in my mind.
Oh, you
like
do the book cover first. That's actually really
cool. I just love to see it almost come to life before I even start writing it. It's like that theme and tone comes to life for me.
Well, that's I mean, obviously one of the favorite parts of doing a book is seeing the book cover. Like whenever it's like, oh my God, that makes it real, and that's the best part of it. And and I got my favorite cover of all my covers is Unclean Hands. I like that cover.
How did this one come about? I'll show it again for the viewers here. There we go.
I go through a service that does backing up even further. Before I wrote 2 books that at that point weren't in a series, and Unclean Hands was the next book, and all 3 had different covers, which were kind of mediocre. And that's when I was learning more about marketing and learning more about selling books. And I talked to a guy who was helping me, and he's like, A, put them in a series because they are thematically related, and B, get covers that work as a series. So I redid the first 3 covers and then added covers for the next books. And covers are, as you know, really important in terms of selling books. A good cover helps and a bad cover hurts. And although, like, my first book had I thought it was a decent cover, and the book sold really, really well. And then when I changed the cover, it sold a little bit better. So those are the sort of things in doing this like a business that you have to be willing to do.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your success so far.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. If you have a few minutes for the after show, the rapid fire after show, we can quickly jump into that. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for doing this. Love it. Thank you.